believe Mr. Trump will not be president.
I don't see it happening.
I'm sorry, you don't?
I don't see it happening.
I don't think there's any way that Donald Trump gets elected president of the United States.
Tomorrow night, I think, when Hillary Clinton wins.
Please help us welcome the candidates. Republican nominee Donald Trump, and can we say this yet?
Probably fine.
President Hillary Clinton.
This means that Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States, winning the most unreal, surreal election we have ever seen.
I'm Maria Rojas.
I'm Jeremy Cleary.
My name is Sarah Ingram.
I'm Morgan Bickford.
I voted for Hillary Clinton.
I voted for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Hillary.
I voted for President-elect Donald Trump. Donald Trump was not my favorite candidate coming into the primaries, honestly. I mean, everyone kind of thought he was a goofball when he started his run. Many people I know who voted for him included.
I felt like there was a blanket understanding that he was a little bit absurd.
I think like a big rude awakening kind of moment was after the election, just this sense of shock, because I had no concept of how the rest of the country would be voting.
When I vote, I like to consider what I think will be best for the country in terms of policies.
When I was voting against all of the ideals that Trump posed.
I grew up in a conservative family, and I have a father in the military, so those ideals of pro-gun and things like that were always in the limelight in my house. And not that my family has never wanted equality for everybody, but those were just more of the ideals that I grew up around. And so I think with this election, it didn't so much become, am I going to vote Republican or Democrat? It came down to, who am I going to vote for that is taking, all of America into concern and is addressing all the issues we have. And so while it, I think, came to a surprise for me that I was voting Democrat, I think it was more so a humanities-based issue than so much a partisan issue.
As a woman of color and a queer woman of color.
As someone who struggles and has struggled with mental health.
As a queer woman and as a person of Hispanic descent, those are the identities that factored into a lot of my worldview and how I voted in this election.
I think just rather than focusing on identity and surface level issues like skin color, it's more important to focus on how the policies will affect those that you care most about and the country as a whole.
I know there were a lot of issues at stake, like politically, economically, and socially, but I think all of the things that make me who I am and the people who I surround myself with, who they are inextricable from like race, class, gender.
As a white heterosexual female, there are a lot of issues that I'm not going to understand. I don't know what it's like to be racially oppressed. I don't know what it's like to not get a job because I'm transgender. And so even though I don't understand those issues personally, I know people who do. And that really pushed me in figuring out who I was through this election, is realizing it wasn't about me.
I think to a certain extent, you can only play identity politics so long before you have to look at the results and consider maybe we should try taking this from a different direction and trying to address the root core of the problem, which I think Donald Trump more effectively does with his policies. And again, there's a lot of concern about him and his vice president-elect being extremely anti-gay or anti-Semite. But I just don't really see that in the evidence. No one really called him racist or sexist or homophobic until he ran against the Democratic president.
I don't know if he can really claim that the media was against him when he said the things that he did and there's proof. I would say that he put those stakes against him, and if he openly said those things and they were put in the media, then that is his own fault. But I'm also not, going to put the other candidate in, a corner of like angelic light and say that she didn't have her own issues. But I don't feel as if the media necessarily backed Donald Trump into his own corner, because those were his own issues that he, had said on camera.
I think his rhetoric was intentional in that I think it was targeted towards a group of people who were thinking finally somebody is like saying the things that I've been told that I can't say, and they like feel like they have their voice back or something along those lines.
I think maybe there was a strategic element to it, but I kind of doubt it. I think he's a 70-year-old white guy who's kind of out of touch with the political correct culture of today. And knowing what you can and can't say is, frankly, getting confusing.
I still think it's important to recognize the like real world implications that that has. So if he can say certain things and do certain things, and tons of other people are thinking that they have a pass to just do like blatantly hateful things and say blatantly hateful things. And so I think the real life impact of projecting his rhetoric everywhere is already being felt really deeply and really harshly by a lot of people.
I think that Trump is someone who doesn't really take himself too seriously, and being in the public eye and a celebrity for so long, I mean, he's someone who goes on the Howard Stern show, says controversial things to get media attention, and jokes around, and people have a huge problem with that, especially as someone running for president. But I think it's part of his personality. It's hard for him to curtail that, especially when he's in the context of a rally where people are chanting his name and he's riled up, and he wants the crowd to keep going, and he wants his name to be in the media cycle because there are positives to that.
I think it's brought up this issue of not being able to sift through what news is actually news.
The mainstream media as a whole this election cycle I was pretty disappointed in terms of the way they addressed the concerns of myself and many other people who do usually vote conservative. Rather than focusing on a lot of the issues of policy in a lot of cases, and this happened on both sides, there were a lot of character assassinations, I like to call it.
I felt like sometimes every time you turn on the TV, it was either about Hillary Clinton's email scandal still going on, or Donald Trump saying he openly sexually assaulted women or made fun of someone with a disability. And so you had these two very negative things in the media, and I feel like I saw more of that than anything else.
I've also been disappointed to see how much of an emphasis in the media has been placed on how divided we are, because I think that to a certain extent that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I try to look at it in a new light, because I feel like that might have been a downfall of the election, is people being so polar in their views but not discussing it with one another and not opening dialogue and saying, I think Donald Trump's absurd, but I want to know why you're voting for him. Because maybe it's not because he's a racist or a bigot or a sexist. Maybe there's some core policies that people really do agree with and that they think are going to be good for our country. And I don't think that was addressed in the election.
Reasonable people can disagree. That's something that is foundational to my beliefs. I don't have a problem with anyone who voted for Clinton over Trump, or even Gary Johnson. Like I know there's a lot of different weighing mechanisms people have for the election, and if something that Trump said is enough for you to never consider voting for him, that's fine.
I think in this divisive time, it's important to not make it more stagnant, to not necessarily agree with one another, but to learn to listen more than anything else.
I guess I would say overall I'm hopeful now that there will be that dialogue, and that moving forward the government will still continue to focus on issues that are important to me and to other people, and take everybody into consideration.